So, welcome to New Video Frontiers, Stéphane.
Thank you.
How's
Well,
it going? How are you?
oh, very well. Thank you for having me today, Vincent.
Yeah.
Very glad to be here with you.
So, firstly, could you just explain a little bit about what RTL Adconnect is? I mean, I think most people in our audience will be aware of RTL being Europe's largest broadcaster, but could you just explain a little bit more about what RTL Adconnect do?
Yes, we are the international ad sales house of the group, of RTL Group. We have operations in more than 15 countries across Europe, but also in the US or in Asia. And basically, we help international clients to do pan-European campaigns in TV, in radio, and in digital.
So it's been a difficult pandemic, I think that's fair to say, for the European broadcasters. We saw huge spikes in viewing as we're all locked in our houses. But
Yeah.
then, in tandem with that, we also saw advertisers panicking and pausing spend or pulling back creatives, which they felt weren't appropriate at the time. Um, I'd be interested in you as somebody who works in different European TV markets. What did you see across Europe, and was the same pattern playing out that I just described?
Yeah, well, it was a hell of a year. I unfortunately think that it's not completely over, unfortunately, and the pandemic is here to stay a few more months. If I look at the latest news, yeah, it's been a hell of a year where we have seen a huge impact from an advertising perspective and from a revenue perspective, where we saw a lot of our clients having severe difficulties or stopping in some sectors, like obvious sectors like travel industry, completely going, with zero investment from, I would say, April onwards until mid of summer, and still very complicated to come back. Some other sectors like the luxury goods, especially linked to the travel retail, etc., have been also very, very hit very much. On the other side, from a media perspective, yes, we have seen a huge impact of the pandemic on the daily viewing times. Basically, the viewing time has skyrocketed across the world, I would say. A few statistics: plus 30 minutes daily viewing in the US, where the US is a huge, increasingly viewing, non-linear type of content. In Europe, in the top five markets, we have experienced plus 81 minutes of daily viewing in the middle of the pandemic, around March, April of this year, with very different, I would say, patterns across Europe. For instance, in Italy was more than 2 hours on top of the daily viewings, which is incredibly huge. In France, it was about an hour and 25 minutes. And in the UK was just below an hour additional daily viewing. And this was around mid-March to mid-April. What was interesting as well is it was on across all target groups, including the youngsters, including the young people. We have experienced, for example, in the UK, a plus 36% of increase in the daily viewing among youngsters. And why? It's simply because I think the TV or linear TV or the telly, as you say in Britain, was back into a reliable piece of information, piece of news, a reliable way of entertaining ourselves. Getting out of the pandemic on a daily basis to be entertained, but also from a news perspective, as I said, it's reliable news, it's premium content, it's no fake news. And I think people really, really massively came back to TV. So it's an extreme resilience of TV during the pandemic. Now, after the pandemic, what we see is basically the daily viewing audience is still very high. It's still very high over summer in June, July. And this trend that we've seen on young target groups is still very here. At least until the end of summer, where we have the latest statistics.
So I know RTL Adconnect you've been sort of chipping away at the US market, trying to sort of capture US advertiser money to sort of bring to Europe.
Yeah.
I'm interested in what your experience has been there as going there as a US company or sorry, going as a European company. And do you feel like we should be seeing more European companies making inroads into the US?
Well, first of all, I think the US or going abroad is part of a core strategy. We're very European from from a history perspective, from a core business perspective, of course. But we've seen clearly over the past few years that basically the world was becoming a little village, and basically brands were becoming more and more global with the decision-making process being a bit more complex than it used to be when you used to have a local media director or local CMO. Now it's a regional or pan-regional, and sometimes it's very centralized. So we see all kinds of advertisers and ways of taking decision for a global brands. So basically, the world has becoming a little bit of a playing field, and we had to fish where the fish are, and we decided a few years ago to expand our strategy. The US was one of the first destination. I will talk about the Asia in a couple of minutes, but yes. So Europe, from a European company going in the US, first of all, it's not easy. That's really clear. It's not a walk in the park, as you say. You need to have a very clear understanding what is the market. You also need to have a clear understanding that from an American perspective, Europe is far away, and Europe is not the United States of Europe. There's a lot of discrepancies in Europe that you need to explain to the Americans. Having said that, after 2 years of business over there, we have opened our first office in New York and then in LA. I think we have clearly identified the growth areas of business. And I can tell you there are 3 growth areas for us, RTL Adconnect. First of all, the HQ of many brands that have been already for a long time investing in our group, but you need to make sure that those companies will continue to invest in the best media and the best broadcasters in Europe. So having a connection with the HQ is clearly a great strategy. The second is about new business and new brands, especially from direct-to-consumer brands, extremely powerful or successful on the US soil, and they want to expand in other areas. So if they want to expand in Europe, we want to be their best partners and to implement a bridge to Europe in a very, very simplified way. And we have discussed with brands like Away or Smile Direct or Slack, or that kind of companies. And the third part is really about the digital business. This has evolved tremendously. You see also central hubs when it comes to digital buy or in-housing trends. And it's good to have those discussions in the US in order to reach the European market or even the global market. And we have put in places different products in order to simplify the access to our inventory. It's the case with the video marketplace, for instance, where in one type of buy, in one connection, you can basically run your campaign across Europe out of the US, for example.
Yeah. So as an industry, we're slowly but surely inching our way towards cross-screen measurement, or so I'm told. What do you think the impact of this is going to be, as particularly from an advertiser's perspective, as they're able to compare, their TV and digital channels? What do you think the net impact will be when we sort of get that accurate cross-screen measurement?
Well, I think for all of us, across the industry, I think cross-measurement capabilities is super key. We need to be able to monitor each and every media we are putting on the table or we are offering to our advertisers when it comes to TV, linear, non-linear, on demand, on mobile, on PC or whatever. So we need to be able to measure all cross screens and to be able to measure somehow the incremental reach and the impact on the reach and frequency, of course, of your media campaigns. There are different opportunities at the moment or initiatives. One, strongly pushed by the WFA, called the Origins project, and basically trying to put together the broadcasters and the platforms in order to find I would say, a common denominator in cross-screen measurements. The issue I would say for us as broadcasters is we want to make sure that we are comparing what is comparable. We are comparing, premium content with premium content. We are comparing the same level of completion rate, the same, amount of seconds. What is a completion on YouTube or what is a completion on TV is really different. So we need to make sure we're comparing the same stuff. We compare with the sound on, because in TV it's sound on, it's full screen, etc. And we also want to use, of course, our local measurement systems like Barb in the UK, but also Médiamétrie in France. So we want to make sure that we are comparing things and not just taking the platform or what they wish for granted. So next to the Origin project, there is the C-Flight, which is also another initiative coming out of the US from NBC. And the C-Flight is, is being discussed at the moment in some countries, including the UK. I think ITV has been very vocal about it. That allows definitely advertisers to have a cross-screen measurement, your campaign on ITV, on ITV Hub, on mobile, on OTT. We will take into account the whole ecosystem in order to really have the number of impressions and the context that your campaign has had across those different devices. So very important for us, of course, to bring something reliable and strong on the market.
So looking at younger audiences, younger audiences are something that I think, there's a perceived challenge for broadcasters. And I think that perception that it has been challenging for broadcasters isn't entirely untrue. However, I also think that sometimes younger audiences, people sort of imagine that it's a zero-sum game where they only spend time on social media and they don't do anything else, which is obviously not true either. But to what extent are they engaging with VOD services or BVOD services if we're talking about broadcasters specific?
Sure. So first of all, the perception is not a reality, and even in the linear viewing time, what I can tell you is, according, of course, to different markets, but you still have an hour and a half, an hour and 50 minutes, or 2 hours and 15 minutes of daily consumption of linear TV, according to the market, among the 15 to 34 years old. So you can still reach a very high amount, a very high number of 18-34 using linear TV. Having said that, we have seen that, of course, youngsters are using more and more linear on-demand, what we call BVOD or broadcaster VOD services. For example, in the UK, during the pandemic, plus 48% of usage of video on demand in the UK for youngsters aged below 16 years old. It's plus 29% in Holland, for example. So what we saw is our own and operated catch-up VOD platforms have again skyrocketed across the board in UK, so ITV Hub in France, Sisplay in Germany, TV Now, etc. And this is a way as well to connect our consumers, even the youngest one, thanks to a good combination of linear and on-demand campaigns.
We're seeing moves across Europe towards, addressable TV advertising. I think, it's fairly advanced in the UK and the rest of Europe is making moves. I think it's fair to say that moves are underway. Let's say that. But, are you concerned that this could possibly affect broadcast TV's positioning as, a mass reach medium? Or, do these opportunities for incremental spend from other advertisers outweigh those concerns? I mean, one of the things I'm hearing, and I've been speaking to planners lately, and one of the things they talk about TV, they just say it's simple, it's straightforward. We buy it, we know what it does, we know how it's measured. The client understands it. It's simple, and there's a value in that simplicity. But as this moves towards addressability, we're moving almost into the digital like domain. Do you think the opportunities outweigh the risks of overcomplicating things?
Well, I'm not sure we're overcomplicating things, to be honest. I think we are following the trend, and the trend is definitely today to use the mass reach capabilities of TV, but also use the targeting capabilities of what digital can bring. And I think in the future, even linear TV will be, well, in the next future, will it be in 3 or 5 years or 10 years? That I don't know. That's the future of TV, but I really have the feeling that even linear TV will be ad served to some extent in order to make it available to more and more screens on CTV and OTT, on mobile, etc., even in linear. But then you will use the media according to your KPIs as a brand. You need to have a high reach in a very limited period of time. You will use linear TV for what it is. Well, branding very quickly. You're going to reach a high level of connect with a high level of population. On the other side, if we can combine this with addressability or addressable capabilities, I think that's the growl that we are looking for, because of course some of our clients want to reduce the waste, but also some of our future clients cannot be on TV today due to high level of entry in terms of costs, or high level versus other media, because they cannot reach a very, very small segment. When I think about luxury automotive, for example, well, everyone is watching TV, but of course you only want to talk to the one who will be able to buy this car of €100,000, for example, for luxury car. So this will allow us to increase the number of sectors that TV as a total video can reach. What we see so far with addressable is the difficulty or the complexity again in Europe is the different numbers or technologies that are available in the different countries. For instance, if you take UK, of course you have AdSmart, very strong within Sky, but if you look in the other market, it's not that strong. Some other technologies are taking up. We talk about cable or IPTV when it comes to France or to Benelux, and if we go now to the German side of things and Austria, Italy, Spain, we're talking about HbbTV technology, which is one of our technology within the RTL group that we have decided to push, thanks to SmartClip or ad tech company. And today, if I look at HbbTV, for instance, we can reach already 29 million uniques on a daily basis. So we have the feeling that addressable TV is only starting. It's only the beginning. When it comes to Europe, it will be a mix of different technologies according to the local, I would say, discrepancies and infrastructure. But I really believe from a marketing perspective that it will combine the very best of TV, meaning reach, with the digital capabilities. And I think it will also make sure that we are providing a better advertising experience to the users. Because of course, if you are broadcasting in a seamless way, adverts that are really focused on your interest, on what you like, etc., I really believe that you will have a better experience with your media and with your broadcaster in the future.
One of the common complaints I hear from broadcasters is that there's a sense that they're not on a level playing field with the tech companies, and there's a few different fronts. I suppose the the first would probably be tax. You know, that often there's questionable amounts of tax being paid by the large tech players. The second would be content, and that, you know, they're often using user-generated content that they're monetizing. And the other thing would be regulation, that they feel that there's, you know, an unfair, there isn't a level playing field. When it comes to regulations, I think, you know, and governments taking action, we're seeing big moves both in the US and the EU toward, you know, to possibly even break the companies up. But certainly there seems to be appetite to rein them in at the very least. What's your feeling on, you know, these moves to control big tech, and do you think that they stand much chance of success?
Well, personally, I'm from a you know, from an industry perspective, I'm not a big fan of over controlling things, but on the other side, I'm a big fan of fair treatment. And I have the feeling indeed that, you know, there's not a fair treatment, hasn't been a fair treatment over the past years between the platforms and the publishers. You know, if you look at a broadcaster like ITV or RTL or M6 in France, we are, as broadcasters, as publishers, accountable for what do we distribute, what we put on our channels, according to the public. If you are placing something violent or extremely disruptive in prime time, I can tell you the very next morning it will be the first page in the newspaper, in the websites, etc. It will be across everywhere, saying that, oh, what's going on with the broadcast, etc. This thing does not happen on the platforms. You can find so many, you know, violent stuff, unappropriated type of content on the platform, and everyone seems to think this is, oh, that's normal because it's on the platform and I cannot control anything. I think there are ways to control, and we can oblige as well those companies who do not invest so much, by the way, in content, to take actions and to be accountable for that. So I think it's fair treatment. And, you know, one of the big advantages of the platforms is they are scalable. They have one platform and basically they roll it out everywhere in the world, and that's super easy to do. On the contrary, we as publishers, we are investing very, very locally. We create local content, local heroes, premium content. We invest a lot of our money in order to do that and in order to generate audience in the future. I think the future will be, because we see now that platforms are investing in content, or some of them like Netflix, etc., heavily in content and disrupting a little bit the industry. I think the next big thing will be about broadcasters or legacy publisher investing more in platforms as well, to make it more simple to buy and to invest our content in the future. So I think that will be the next shift in the coming future, where we will invest more into platforms in order to facilitate, simplify the access to our inventory.
Stéphane, that was fantastic as always. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Vincent. Thank you for having me today.
Okay, so next up is our panel looking at where CTV sits in the planning process. I'm going to ask my two panelists to introduce themselves to kick things off. Patrick, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, of course. Thanks, firstly, for having me. Happy to be here to discuss all things CTV. My name is Patrick Zinga. I work at Starcom in an international role as a digital strategy lead. So my job is essentially understanding digital in all its glory and ensuring that our clients have that understanding as well, and they pick the right place to essentially invest their digital budgets.
Li-Ting?
Hi, I'm Li-Ting. I'm the head for audience planning and programmatic for Havas Media Group.
Now, before we kick things off, and I'd like to say that, the prep call we had for this session was one of the most interesting. I've never laughed so much. Uh, there's a certain amount of confusion about where CTV sits. Can we kick things off? Actually, just firstly explaining to some people might not know what a planner does. So, Lee-Ting, do you want to start by just explaining what you do on a day-to-day basis, how you allocate budgets, that type of thing?
I think it's more about what my team has been doing on a day-to-day basis. So I think in terms of the how do we plan? So we basically, obviously, we are in charge of the programmatic element of the plan. And then, so usually when the team gets brief, and then there's and then the team creates a strategic plan, which looking at online, offline, and then TV, digital, everything, media, all channels together. And then it will get into the TV and digital buys in terms of and then the plans on that element. And then within that, there is a brand and performance elements of the plan. And then when it comes to probably it's a connected TV part of it that will come from the programmatic side and the digital side of the plan.
Yeah. So CTV is a little bit unusual in that it's a little bit video, it's a little bit TV, it's a little bit programmatic, and it's a little bit digital. And often agencies carve those different things up and put them in different buckets. We know that this is causing a certain amount of confusion in terms of it not being entirely clear how this is managed within the owns it, I suppose. Is that something you've experienced?
Well, I think the lines when it comes to CTV, because it is still relatively new, the lines are quite blurred as it currently stands, especially in the industry as a whole. I don't think this is a agency specific issue. I think across the board, first and foremost, we have an issue deciding who has ownership of VOD, let alone connected TV. The reality really is we don't necessarily know where this sits, and I don't think in the near future we'll ever get to that stage where we have one person who sits in our team as an expert who purely buys CTV, especially now when the scale is actually so small. Maybe that might change once we have that scale. Then, as you'd expect, if scale is significant, then investment needs to be made in developing a team, and it will make sense for agencies to actually put that money into that investment for that specific team that manages CTV. But realistically, as it currently stands, in terms of where it sits, it's whoever has ownership of the media plan. They have to decide: does it sit with programmatic? Does it sit with the TV team? Does it sit with the digital team? From my experience, it's whoever tells a better story, whoever can sell it into the client that it makes sense for it to sit within their plan in accordance to all of the other elements within that media plan as well.
Yeah. Lee, does that ring true for you? How do you manage it at Havas?
Well, I guess there's no wrong answer for this one, isn't it? So I think it is about whoever tells the best stories, and as Patrick says, that is a very sensible ways of working. I think what we're doing in Havas is that, so currently, because we do have a very established TV team, and then so what they do actually is that they are planning the CTV element of that, and then putting on the plan, and then obviously filling all the information that's required for the plan, and then it gets to the programmatic team, the specialist, and then who's actually doing the activation of the activities. So I guess it's a lot of a collaboration and integration between teams, and then I think that is also a better way in the long better ways of working in the longer run, and then because we want to bring all the specialist talent together, and then yeah. So for example, when you created a plan, because connected TV has a slightly different information to compare with the traditional TV plan. And then that's where the programmatic plan is, and then they will need to involve and then to provide some of the information at the planning stage. So that is a form of a collaboration in terms of getting the best between teams. So, I mean, it's currently working well for us for the moment. But then I think, as Patrick says, that when it's scaled a bit more, and then that could look a bit different. But then we'll just have to cross that bridge when we get there.
Yeah, I think one thing that I think people who sit outside of agencies often, you know, when they question, why isn't the agency doing this or why are they doing that? They often forget that, you know, an agency relationship is very much a partnership with a client and the client has to sign off on most things. Where are clients with CTV? Are they up to speed on it? Do they understand it? Patrick, do you want to maybe give a few examples of where you think clients might be?
Yeah, I think it's confusing, just in general, CTV, because people still see CTV as TV. I think we're overcomplicating things a little bit. There are loads of stats, you know, loads of clients have come to us and said, you know, they've been approached by different media owners who are giving them stats, things like, you know, if we look at 2014, smart TV penetration in the UK alone was at 12%. And now, you know, 5-6 years later, it's above 50%. So clearly there's significant growth here in terms of opportunity. And when you ask and talk to clients, they all want to be innovating. They all want to be doing the next new thing. They all want to push forward and try something new. So I think there's definitely a lot of hype when it comes to CTV at this particular moment in time, but this isn't really backed up by reality. So, you know, people talk about stats, salespeople, especially within this space, talk about stats in terms of the amount of eyeballs that are on smart TV. So they say, this is how much viewership that's actually going on within this particular space. Less people are watching linear TV. I think Samsung came out with the 42% of TV viewers watch less than 2 hours of linear TV a month. But what they're not actually telling us, and what they're not telling our clients, is what does that mean in terms of ad scale? So yes, viewership is increasing. Yes, viewership is great. Yes, there are more smart TVs out there in the market, but what about the opportunities when it comes to ad views? They never talk about how many people are actually watching ads. And I think that's where the confusion essentially lies for most of our clients. And it makes it difficult, I guess, for us to try to leverage what our partners tell us and what we know is actually available on the platform.
How about you, leading in terms of your clients, and also, yeah, in terms of the scale? What type of scale are you seeing? Yeah, that'll be interesting to talk about too.
Well, the scale at the moment is quite minimum, both in the demand and also the investment level. It's quite. I mean, I would put it as more of a tactical instead of always on. But then that is very different compared with TV, isn't it? So because it is a very interesting topic, that because there is a TV in the connected TV words in their phrase in it, and then it's actually very different from the behavior and then also the capabilities, and then I think the complication at this, or we can say confusion, is caused by maybe I think TV as a very traditional sort of ways of advertising. It's probably one of the oldest ways of advertising. And then that exists so long before digital age. And then, so it's just that at the moment, so we're trying to fit the digital capabilities into a TV concept. And then I think that's where a lot of advertisers may find it difficult to sort of process in, you know, sort of integrate in the modern concept of the TV, right? So I think it's I think we need other agencies and together with the suppliers, and then need to help to address that. And then because there is a need, because the viewership has gone up for smart TV, and then all this because the technology has evolved. And then, so it's almost like inevitable. It's going to develop towards that direction. So what can we do together, and then agencies and the publishers, and then to address this challenge together, and then to make sure that the brands are more clear on where connected TV sits, and then how they are contributing to the overall strategies. and then how it will exist together with TV and linear TV, and then also other video formats, or having also, that doesn't mean that it might have a unique role to play on the plan. So I think there's a lot of questions that need to address that properly.
Yeah. Patrick, what's your feeling, particularly in terms of how you would compare CTV to traditional TV or even to online video? What's your, how does it compare?
Yeah, I think it's very difficult, just even as a planner, to sort of understand where this sits. I think Leighton pretty much summarized it quite nicely there, that they all have to work well in conjunction with each other when you're looking at the overarching digital channel space. I think typically when people are thinking about planning, your go-to for scale is TV. You know, we still speak to clients this day in terms of broadcast TV, linear TV. It still makes sense. You're still getting mass scale within that particular space. We then went on to online video, which VOD was a part of. And that made sense when you're trying to reach, you know, new audiences, younger audiences that don't necessarily spend a lot of time in TV. And then the position of social platforms is all about engaging, and, you know, how do you actually get involved in a conversation or a topic that people are more likely to engage with within that particular space. I think the nature of digital channels, of which, you know, connected TV now kind of forms a part of, it's ever developing. It changes at such a fast pace, and it's up to us, the planners or the advertising practitioners, it's up to us to keep up. And it's our job to assess what all of these opportunities are, how they work well together, and what we consider to be, I guess, the best option for our client, depending on what their objectives are. I think in terms of, you know, CTV and where it sits, that's still up for discussion, and it's really dependent on, you know, what's, like I said before, what's the best story to tell in terms of how we're trying to engage with our audiences. Because at the end of the day, the buck starts and ends with audiences. What are people actually doing within the space? How are they consuming media? And what's the best platform for us to tell our brand stories?
Yeah, and is there any, what's the main hurdle in terms of CTV taking its place as a permanent fixture on every plan, you know, pretty much in the same way broadcast TV does today? What does CTV have to do in order to get to that point? Is there any one main barrier? Leighton, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few things that we need to consider. So first is the technology. So that needs to evolve together with, pick up the pace in terms of how TV inventories open up for like programmatic, and then, you know, all this and then together. So I mean, I think that it's more difficult here because obviously GDPR, and then also the data, and then the, you know, how much that the broadcasters are willing to share. And then we see a lot of maybe a chance that, and then a lot of the broadcasters that they will have you know, the technology on their own, but then how should we, you know, how will we connect them together to provide that that reach for the overall audiences? And then that is going to bring on the questions about, okay, that's how do we measure more effectiveness, and then how do we measure the performance? And then yes, we have a reach as a overall KPI, but then the effectiveness, and then now moving into how is that going to contribute towards the performance, and then media consumption as well. So I think there's a lot of questions need to answer, and then also the buying model, like the pricing. So I think Patrick just mentioned about the viewership, and then compare with the ad viewership as well. So are we, and then for example, we have this case that we recently come across, which is that so we're basically buying the CTV ads in a CPM model, but then the ads was not playing until it's being clicked on. And then I was like, well, then how is that different from a standard display banner? So I think this needs to be consider like prior to any of the plans and the format, and then also what's the buying model, and then is it actually making sense? So these are the things that because in that case that so we could the advertisers could potentially just paying on the impression, but then without the viewers and then being able to view the actual ads. So obviously we spotted that, but then I think that was one of the learnings that we actually wanted to share as well.
Yeah, the measurement issue is something that's been a recurring theme over the years at our events. I think on the digital side, you've got people who can do lots of very granular things, but because they weren't using things like panels, the fact that, in the past, maybe display budgets were often, in very high percentages, not seen by anyone. Well, whereas on the flip side, the digital people would often criticize the TV world for using, seemingly primitive panel-based measurements and run it down. I mean, obviously CTV is sort of coming in between these two worlds. For you, Patrick, is the measurement problem, how big is the measurement problem for CTV today, do you think?
It's a large barrier. It's probably one of the largest barriers, because I think a lot of clients want proof points. Before they go live with something, they want to see that it's tried, it's tested, it works more than anything else. Like Leighton was saying, if we go live with something and actually when we go live, we realize there are loads of issues, loads of problems, tags aren't tracking correctly. What we assume was a CPM buy actually is more similar to a CPC buy. That's where the issue essentially lies. So I completely agree with Leighton that there needs to be better targeting capabilities within the platform and better measurement. It needs to be on board with how we use Facebook or we use Google in regards to audience tracking, audience targeting, and then proving the effectiveness of what you're doing within CTV. Because currently right now it still sits within that TV space and it isn't really separated when it comes to measurement from an econometrics perspective. It's very difficult to go back to the clients and say, because you added the additional CTV tactical element here, that has increased your revenue or your sales or your goals, whatever that was for your business, by X%. So until measurement is really up there amongst some of the other channels that we currently have, it is seemingly more and more difficult to put CTV on the plan. Unless, again, you go forward to your client and say, this is new, this is exciting, it's shiny, let's try it out. And you have, we always have clients that are eager to test new things and seeing how they sort of work moving forward. So there's always an opportunity, there's always an option, because like I said, viewership is up. There's a lot of money to be made when it comes to eyeballs, because we're media, we work in media, we go where people go. We're a people first industry, so where we're seeing huge consumption is definitely where we're probably going to invest in the future, but we need to make sure that we have the right measurement and the right targeting capabilities in place before significant investment is actually placed in.
Yeah. So I'm conscious that we've been talking about a lot of negative, probably the downsides. So to finish on a positive note, I mean, looking to the future, how do we improve this so that the market does develop and that it becomes something that's of real value to your clients? Lee, do you want to inspire our audience?
Well, no, I think I'm not. I'm definitely not saying something that that's new to everyone. And then I think that it's great that we know what's the challenges, right? And then that's how we address it. And then that's where we turn into the opportunities. And then so we know this up front, and then we know that these are the things that we need to address before the scale. And then I think it's good that some brands, and then obviously some advertisers are more willing to test, and then for this space, which is great because the learnings that we can get from those, even the tactical activities, is valuable. And then these are the ones that is going to help us to address it, and then to prepare when we need to scale. So I think because ultimately we are moving into the smart world, like smart world,
yeah.
And then the connected TV does provide this sort of shared experience and as a family, and then just like the traditional TV. So I think the opportunities, I think it's just for us to be more adapted and then push the technology and then together with the suppliers and the publishers, and then to make it happen. And then I think it is, I think the same way that we did for, programmatic about, over 10 years ago. So all the changes, we'll get there, certainly. But it's just that we are just in the sort of the learning journey at time.
Well, I'm inspired. Patrick, have you got a positive note for everyone?
Yes, completely agree. We're in that development mode. But I'm going to go back to, how we see connected TV within this actual space. And my honest opinion is that we need to continue understanding media from a consumer's point of view when these new technologies come into place. And what we should be doing is simplifying that view to that of the consumer. So, as a customer, I see and define TV as exactly that. It's a TV screen. I don't care about how people in marketing or people in agency define all of the different elements, because customers don't know what BVOD is, SVOD, CTV. All the customer sees in front of them is, I want to watch Bake Off on Channel 4. They might be watching it on 4 OD, but in their minds, in their opinion, this is Channel 4, and this is how I've always sort of watched this. And I think we're definitely in that stage of development. We're getting there. The pace has definitely been picked up. Because we were quite slow in getting TV to be a bit more digital and digitized, and getting some of our partners alongside that journey. I think we're definitely getting there. For example, Planet V by ITV, it's us moving towards the right direction. BritBox, that collaboration of different channels working, different broadcast channels, competitors in the past working together to come up with a solution that makes sense from an advertising perspective. I think what none of us want, what no one wants, is for another player to come into this particular space, like your Googles or your Facebooks of the world, and completely take over because they have those digital capabilities already in place. We don't need to put more money into those particular partners. But what we want to do, especially in agency world, from the people that I've spoken to, not just in my agency, but other agencies as well, is help these partners that we currently have develop their product and make it better. So we go to our clients and sell on those products, because like I said, there's definitely value in connected TV moving forward.
Okay, to find that round off, I would like to say thank you very much to you both. I've been looking forward to doing this panel all week, and yeah, neither of you disappointed in the slightest. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, so Rory, you're something of an expert on, incentivizing human behavior. I mean, how many creatives you see actually encourage us to change our behavior? I mean, is it just that some deliberately aren't designed to do that and they're looking for some sort of emotional connection with you?
I don't see the point of that. I mean, ultimately, now it may be a long-term effect, as I'm sure it is, and it may also be an uncertain effect that you can't actually measure, okay? We have to be really conscious of this, because a large part of advertising patently works in ways which will be almost impossible to attribute. Once the temporal distance from the stimulus to the behavioral change takes place. It's very, very valuable being famous, because, for example, if you're a famous B2B brand, when your chief executive rings somebody up, they return his call, right? One reason I like working at Ogilvy, it's not the only reason, but one reason I like working at Ogilvy is if I contact, Ogilvy is probably better known than most ad agencies, certainly worldwide. If you ask ordinary members of the public who aren't in marketing, which ad agency have you heard of? Ogilvy, typically, Saatchi's used to lead it in the UK because, of course, their connection with the Conservative Party and so on made them very famous. And you, of course, had Charles Saatchi and Morris. But broadly speaking, Ogilvy is the most famous. And generally, if I write to a Nobel Prize winning economist and say, we'd like you to speak at our Nudgestock Festival, if he sees vice chairman of Ogilvy, he generally doesn't chuck it in the bin. Okay. Whereas if I was the vice president of Zog Advertising, he probably would. And so all sorts of inferences come with a degree of fame, which generally tend to be positive. Okay. Now, it's never possible for Ogilvy to make the connection between a single marketing act and a Nobel Prize winner's willingness to actually reciprocate. Okay. There are large numbers of things in the world, like weather forecasting. You know, in weather forecasting, you can actually, they've got much better at it, and you can forecast 3 days ahead with a tolerable degree of accuracy. 15, 20 days ahead, forget it. Probably the best bet is to say the same as last year or something like that. But you can't really forecast. And I would argue the same thing applies in reverse to attribution and measurement. That a certain and very large and very important part of advertising will always be immeasurable. And therefore, if you make it a condition for advertising that you must be able to prove its effectiveness, you are confined to doing only about 30% of what advertising can do, and not necessarily the most important part.
One of the things
does that make sense, by the way?
It does. It makes perfect. It makes perfect sense. One of the things I've been speaking to Shingy about is how I have this feeling that we're seeing less interesting creative work online. And when I say that, I don't mean the ads themselves, which are occasionally very good. And I'm not sure what the feeling is on the creative side of the industry, but it feels like the technology has just been, it's sort of commoditized, and we've decided that there's sort of mass push out of these commodified ad units, which often go relatively unnoticed. I don't have that wow moment that I used to get.
The guy who you need to talk to about this, and all I will do is paraphrase him because he's much more brilliant than me, is Paul Feldwick. Yeah. Went to the same school as me, I'm proud to say, actually. So we do have one thing in common. He's a fellow Monmouth schoolboy. But Paul Feldwick makes the point that he's got an upcoming book called Why Does the Peddler Sing? And the point is that sales and entertainment and likability and entertainment have always been highly correlated and interconnected, okay? That there's always been a link between salesmanship and entertainment. Now, because he would argue that a certain part of advertising should be there genuinely to entertain, you know. Now, he knows whereof he speaks on the grounds that he was working at working at BMP at a time when they produced things like, for example, the Boff, Rowan Atkinson, Barclaycard advertising, and they produced John Smith's and so on and so forth. And it was advertising that was part of the public repertoire, if you like. You know, catchphrases, jingles were there, but there was also a high degree of genuine imagination and creativity, but not so much as to make the thing niche. Okay? And it's worth remembering that you can be niche in your targeting, but you can also be niche in your creative. You can produce creative which is just designed to appeal to a very small tribe. Now, the real achievement of an entertainer is actually to produce something of high quality which has broad appeal. You know, it's something which actually has highbrow and lowbrow appeal, you know, the kind of Raymond Chandler, P.G. Wodehouse stuff, where lots and lots of people enjoy it. That's a literary comparison, but you can imagine the same thing in film, okay? You know, Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I don't know anybody who doesn't enjoy that film, but it's still an intelligent, sophisticated, imaginative film. And Paul argues that I think he blames creatives a teeny weeny bit too much, actually, because I think it's the way that creatives are briefed. But the way that advertising agencies have to look deadly serious, and that we're often in a business culture which prizes analytical skills over emotional skills, it's very difficult for a bunch of Oxbridge graduates who are running an ad agency to walk into a building and say, to be absolutely honest here, what you need is a dog and a cheerful song. Okay. Now, we know, actually, if you looked at the data, you would see that ads with animals in work better than ads without animals in. And among animals, I'd include things like the Smash Martians and things like that. You know, I mean, imaginary animals, if you like, imaginary life forms. And we probably could find out that music works pretty damn well. But it's very difficult, unless you're Alan Brady and Marsh and it's 1977 or whatever, it's very difficult to go in and say, look, to be honest here, what we need is, you know, a good old jingle and a meerkat or whatever it may be. So instead, you've got to get a lot of people into over-intellectualize things by talking about your brand onion and so forth. And I think the relative importance placed on the what you might call the vital but trivial is too little. Because there are certain things that are trivial but make a huge difference. And it's always worth remembering that in a business context, we don't actually like talking about them. So one of the slogans of the Ogilvy behavioral science practice is, in fact, dare to be trivial. And the point I'm making about that is that in a board meeting context or in a business, imagine what it's like presenting to the board, including two for fuck's sake, it's the phone. Sorry. So...
We can leave that in.
So imagine what it's like if you're presenting to a board meeting which has sort of two, you know, life peers and a distinguished non-executive director or two, and you know, three people whose background is in finance, and you've got to present about the massive business opportunities presented by an animated dancing goat. It's not a comfortable conversation. It's not comfortable for the marketing director, and it's not even comfortable at some level for the person in the ad agency. And they have to demonstrate their rationalist credentials with every meeting. I always say this, actually, an awful lot of business activity is kind of performative. I think Zoom's taught us that an awful lot of business travel and an awful lot of holding meetings as theatre didn't really add anything to the communications, the inherent communication in the piece. It was just performative. Look how much we care. We've put on this thing for you. You know, look how much I care. I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning and I've flown to Frankfurt. Okay. It was signaling. It was advertising, in fact. Yeah. It's effective, but unfortunately, what the problem is that everybody ends up doing it. That's another case where advertising might be ineffective, by the way, where you get into a complete arms race. Fortunately, the culture of business is so dominated by economics that most of your competitors will find it culturally difficult to spend big on advertising. So if you're capable of spending big on advertising, that constitutes a sustainable advantage.
Yeah. What you were saying there about brands having to be entertaining is a reminder of the David Ogilvy quote, the best ideas come as jokes, make your thinking as funny as possible.
That was more to do with, actually, I mean, David, for a long time, he recanted on this. He always believed that people don't buy from clowns and that salesmanship was a serious business. And he used to reject ads that were funny. And to his credit, I mean, the great thing with David is his internal contradictions. I know that sounds a ridiculous thing to say, but David was totally happy to change his mind and was indeed a highly contradictory person anyway, highly whimsical person. Great man, but highly whimsical, you know. And he actually changed his mind on that. He saw new evidence that actually humour worked in advertising, and he was happy to accept that new evidence because, apart from anything else, salesmen do use humour. Actually, if you're a salesman, particularly with your regular customers, actually a degree of joshery and badinage is a major part of your shtick, because likability matters. And I don't know entirely why that is. Part of it is that being likable is more effortful than being a twat, right? If you want someone to like you, it requires more mental effort and quite often more physical effort in terms of acts of politeness or acts of kindness than just being a twat. So the very fact that you're making an effort to be amusing, likable, charming, or you're using, at least if you can't be charming yourself, you've got the money to pay for a celebrity who can be charming, okay? Those things are of significance. You know, a salesman who came round to me and said, usual, yeah, okay, yeah, fine, okay, without any attempt of, any attempt at charm, you know, well, apart from in France, where it seems to be a bit more common. But I mean, you know, but in fairness, in France, you have to go through this ritual as a customer, because in France, the relative status of seller and buyer is slightly different. In France, you go, bonjour, madame, bonjour, because apparently English tourists are rude because they walk into a shop without going through this little dogs sniffing each other's bottoms ritual of saying bonjour to each other. Obviously I don't do it in Sainsbury's, that'd be weird. But Leclerc, bonjour, Monsieur Leclerc. But I mean, there are these rituals, and they vary from country to country. But also, there's also a thing, by the way, particularly in the Anglo-Saxon market. Global advertising might have a little bit of of the blame to carry here, which is that not all humour translates, and often humour, by the way, you would think it doesn't translate when it does. That's another thing. You'd assume a lot of humour is actually more culturally specific than it is. The biggest surprise Monty Python ever experienced is when they went big in the United States. Because they'd said, look, okay, we're big in the UK, but we can forget about overseas, and we can doubly forget about becoming big in the US, because there's no way the Americans would understand our points of reference or, anything else. And they'd also given up being international when I think they went somewhere it might have been Holland, and someone said, tell me, Mr. Jones, why is it that you English people find farting funny? And that's probably Scandinavia, isn't it? Okay. And they thought, okay, people who don't find farting funny, I'm sure Scandinavians find farting funny. I have no idea who this person was. And he must have been like Holland's least funny bloke, right? But he met the Pythons, and for some reason gave the Pythons the impression that Dutch people didn't find farting funny, which strikes me as implausible, because I suspect that all cultures find fart, possibly not the French, but nearly all cultures would find a fart amusing in some respect. Okay, I mean, you might find a freak culture out there where farting was a sign that you'd enjoyed the meal, and in fact, not to fart would be extremely rude. I'm not suggesting it's innate, but generally we react to kind of involuntary rule breaking, as it were, like farting at a dinner, as inherently quite funny. Okay, and so I think that the international thing may have made people think that humor is actually more culturally specific than it is. Some basic elements of humor, if you take Hamlet or Heineken, for example, that translates patently. And it's interesting because actually, if you look at those, weird programs on YouTube, which is, 20 of the world's funniest ads, then generally what they show is that there's a large repertoire of things which are universally considered amusing. Social embarrassment seems to be pretty, safe as something which we find inherently funny. And also we find inherently funny what you might call that kind of, the little guy punching up. We find kind of status reversal amusing generally. And so there's certainly enough there to keep you funny. But I think that there's something here in terms of I think we maybe have to look at what the actual opportunity cost of account planning is. Now, I'm not denying there are huge benefits to account planning, but what we've never considered is that there might be an opportunity cost as well, that when your whole thing is overthought, the pressure to recognize the planner's upfront work by reflecting an insight which almost certainly isn't, we need a dog, or what about Marvin Gaye, or has anybody thought of getting this famous I don't know about football, a famous footballer, right, in. I mean, that's one of the reasons you need a creative team, because to tell me, who else is famous, because my own view of fame is probably a bit distorted. But I think we do need to talk about the opportunity cost of planning, and that sometimes by making strategy too heavy, and by insisting that strategy comes before execution, I think in advertising, post-rationalization is perfectly acceptable. I know it's a weird thing to say, but if you come up with a great idea and instinctively you feel it works, and then you can work out why it works in retrospect, I think that's okay. I think process is overrated. Now, just to be clear about this, occasionally people say, you don't believe in process. You're an anarchist, man. You shouldn't be allowed anywhere near anything. No. I believe in checklists. I believe in checklists, and I believe in frameworks, in that I think there are useful frameworks which help you categorize different ideas and interventions and make sure you're getting the balance right. And I believe in checklists because it prevents you overlooking something, which we can very easily do. But I don't believe in an absolutely rigid sequential process. Don't believe in it at all. And if you talk to anybody who's been in advertising for any long time, they don't believe in it either. I was talking to John Steele, and it's always a bit of a kind of, can I let you into something? It's a bit like coming out, I don't really believe. And they'll go, no, I don't either, And because process is what you want if you want to produce the same thing again and again and again.
Yeah.
Now, there is a sort of rule box. I mean, it's worth remembering. One of the funniest things you can ever read is the list of 10 or 11 rules that the makers, they were brothers, I think, weren't they, who made the airplane movies. And they had certain rules, but rule 11 was you could break any of these rules if it's still hilariously funny to do so. But one of their rules was if you had a visual gag, the actors must not react to it. So when the shit literally hits the fan in the control tower on the set of Airplane, the actors act as if there's nothing remotely unusual about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, you know, obviously that's a bit strange. You're in a room and a huge turd hits an electric fan. Generally, we'd react. But their rule was it's funnier if people treat it as if it's perfectly normal. And they had about 10 or 11 of these rules. And given that they produced, you know, 4 or 5, you know, very, very funny films, it's worth noting that they just had these, you know, guidelines. But they did have the caveat that if you don't lose a really, really great joke, because it breaks one of your rules.
So if you had a 10 million budget, and I was thinking just to say for any brand, but I'm going to rein it in. And let's say it's a biscuit brand, and you had to choose between content marketing, influencers, or traditional advertising. Where would you invest that cash?
First of all, I tend to see the value of different media as being multiplicative. Now, by the way, there's an important point to that. The idea that, and there's evidence that if you put a message in more than one medium, the effect is a kind of multiplier, not addition. Okay. So there is effectively a halo effect across different channels and so forth. So the fact that it's multiplication teaches a very simple thing. 2 times 2 is a bigger number than 1 times 3. Okay. So whereas if you think it's additive, then what you'll say is there's no difference in addition between 1 plus 3 and 2 plus 2. But 2 times 2 is a bigger number than 1 times 3. So if you accept that it's multiplicative, then the first thing I'd assume is some sort of balance. Okay, unless I had very strong reasons. So I would start instinctively. The only thing I will say, and this is a bit unusual for me, because generally I'm very Binet, Field, Ritson. You know, you have to spend your money upstream. You have to spend your money in mass media, because media promises made expensively in a public realm are just more convincing and carry more import than media promises made privately in a digital realm. Okay.
Yeah.
And there are multiple reasons for that when you think about it. It's much more difficult to lie to a crowd than it is to an individual, because all individuals have, you know, informational weak spots, whereas a crowd in aggregate is going to know when you're lying. It's going to find out. Okay. The other thing I would say, in fairness, and I'm happy to be contradicted, is I would optimize downstream first. Because there's no point in doing a great ad campaign if your conversion is terrible or if your distribution is terrible, you know. Now, of course, it may be necessary to advertise to get distribution. But if you're an online player, I would say let's optimize the conversion rate first, okay? Because it's 3 times more valuable to advertise a store that converts efficiently. Okay, if you imagine a thought experiment, right, which is you've got a chain of shops and the staff in the shops haven't had any training, and when anybody comes in, they tell them to fuck off, right? Advertising that chain of shops would be a stupid thing to do, right? Sort out the sales force first before you start advertising, because it's rather like in anything which is sequential, which has a bottleneck. Sort out the bottlenecks from the end backwards. Now, if you think about it in terms of what you might call systems thinking, I suppose, there's no point in widening a road if there's a bottleneck or a regular traffic jam just around the corner. All you do is you make the traffic jam wider and a bit further down the road. You don't make it any shorter in duration, right? Okay, so if you want to widen a road, you should do it from the end backwards, by and large. And I don't think road people fully understand this, because they tend to widen carriageways, both sides of a carriageway at the same time. And oftentimes there never was any problem in the other direction.
Yeah.
Okay. So widening one carriageway but not the other strikes me as a perfectly sensible thing to do, because what you're actually doing there is there's no point in widening a road until you know there isn't a traffic jam to get off the road, basically. That's what I'm saying. And in the same way, when you're improving a funnel, I think you should start with the bottom and work up. But what you should not do is get so preoccupied with the bottom that you never do anything else. Because then you're falling into the trap I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, where essentially you're incapable of doing anything you can't measure and attribute. And my argument would be that the greater part of the value of advertising will always consist, unless you start implanting chips in people's heads, right? The greater part, simply through practical reasons, the greater part, look at COVID, okay? There's so much we still don't know because we just can't do the experiments that are necessary. They'd be unethical, okay? And in advertising, there will always be a huge amount you don't know, because in a 7-year period between someone seeing an ad for an Aston Martin and buying an ad for an Aston Martin, too much happens for you ever to be able to actually make the connection, okay? So, and even if you had the data, it's dubious that you'd actually pick it up in any kind of statistical analysis. So we just have to accept, that a certain amount of the real world is always going to be unknowable, just as we accept that we don't know what the weather's going to be like on June the 20th, 2027. And if we're incapable of doing that, now at the general level, we know June's warmer than December, okay? We can make estimates about what the weather's going to be like on June, It probably isn't going to be 17 below zero, and barring some climatic catastrophe, okay? But the idea that because we can't accurately predict, we should basically regard this activity as pointless is silly. Because people planning to get married don't know what the weather's going to be like, but they tend to get married in August or July rather than, in January, because by the law of averages, that works. And similarly, we know to a very strong level of statistical certainty that by the law of averages, advertising works. Excess share of voice. When I was president of the IPA, if you have a greater proportion of share of voice than you have market share, your market share will tend to grow until it matches your share of voice. We know that, okay? We don't know it. We don't know why. We don't know exactly what the mechanism is that causes this to happen. And we don't know what the weather's going to be like on June the 23rd, 2027. But that doesn't mean we can't look at it. That's rather like saying you can only use medical treatments if you know how they work at the molecular level. It's setting the bar for action far, far too high.
It's fantastic, Rory. Cheers.
No problem at all. It's been a joy. Thanks ever so much.
Welcome to this panel on the pathway to programmatic TV. My name is Lindsay Rowntree. I'm head of content and ExchangeWire, and I'm delighted to be joined by my esteemed panel, far more expert than I am in this, who are going to hopefully help explain, define what programmatic TV is, how it scales, what its opportunities and challenges are, and what the future of this medium within the broader TV landscape looks like. So we'll kick off with introductions. Silvia, I'm going to come to you first, please.
Thank you, Lindsay. I'm Silvia Broggi. I'm International Marketing and Martech Director for Publitalia, the advertising sales house of Mediaset Italy.
Thank you, Silvia. Lara, over to you.
Hi, I'm Lara Izlan, Director of Advertising Data and Analytics at ITV, UK's largest commercial broadcaster. My team's remit is basically the data and insight, targeting products and measurement solutions for advanced advertising.
Brilliant. Andre.
Good afternoon. I'm Andre Swanston. I'm the CEO of TruOptik, a TransUnion company, and we provide most of the identity resolution and third-party data marketplace for connected TV in the United States.
And congratulations, Andre, on your recent news of becoming a TransUnion company. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
And finally, Austin.
Hi, I'm Austin Scott. I lead video market development across Europe. I'm based in London, and Xander's kind of initiative around helping the buy, the sell, or the curator become more successful in video and television and CTV is kind of the hope and the direction that we think Europe is heading in. So happy to be here.
Brilliant. Thank you, guys. So I want to kick off by defining programmatic TV. And it feels like a really obvious question because it feels like we should all know what programmatic TV is and does. But in a world where we're talking more and more about OTT and CTV and HTTP TV and IPTV, there's too many names, too many acronyms. I feel like the word programmatic is getting lost along the way. So I'm interested to hear from each of you how you each define programmatic TV, because I feel it could be different. So Andre, we're going over the US first. I want to hear from you how you're defining programmatic TV.
You know, the funny thing is in the US, we don't use the term programmatic TV quite as much. I think everything has gone so quickly towards connected TV and about 20% of connected TV in the US is bought programmatically. But I don't think that over the last year or two, we've seen as much as a differentiation in terms of whether people are executing their buy through a direct buy that runs on connected TV or programmatically. It's been more advanced TV, connected TV, the jargon. What I think is interesting, you know, one of the partnership announcements that we just made recently was our data marketplace, which is mostly used for connected TV, is going to be powering Nielsen's new addressable ad replacement solution on linear to smart televisions. And then you also have people that are using identity resolution for addressable targeting to satellite boxes and cable boxes. I think as more of that is automated in a programmatic way in the US, which it's definitely growing, and you go from 20% of connected TV and very little of the others being bought in a programmatic way, I think the term will probably be used more. So I think going back to the original question from definition wise, I think it's just kind of any automated way to access television inventory, whether that is dynamic ad replacement, connected TV, or addressable on a set-top box. And that's what I think will settle across the industry as the term.
Interesting how you refer to it across the industry, because we talk about CTV quite a lot, and when we do refer to it on a more global basis, it stems off insights and examples from the US. So interested to hear kind of what your stance is on that terminology and how it's evolving with what the other panelists will say as well. So I'm going to go back to the UK now with Lara. How is ITV defining programmatic TV in this context?
So Lindsay, first thing to say is you're absolutely right. We are acronym-tastic, I think, in TV. I've now been, in TV coming from other media for almost 2 years now. And, the first challenge was actually getting all those acronyms right. And actually in the midst of all that complexity, I think our view on programmatic is in a way going back to the basics. So I've, personally worked in programmatic for about 10 years, not as long as some, but long enough to remember the original promise of programmatic, and I'm thinking, the promise was automating media processes so we could connect buyers and sellers without all the efficiencies that we had in the middle. It was about, how we apply data to improve advertising effectiveness, both from a targeting perspective, but also from an insights and measurement perspective. It was about supply demand economics, so that we can create fair and optimal pricing for our inventory. And it was about giving buyers and sellers more flexibility. I remember, I remember this very clearly. It was about having more control over how we sell our inventory, and buyers more control in terms of how they could, launch their campaigns. And to me, I think, these were the original promises of programmatic. And from an ITV perspective, and with the launch of Planet V, a new addressable media platform, those are the underlying ambitions that we're trying to address with programmatic in TV, to bring back that original promise, to overlay that on TV, which we know has so many different benefits, and to really sort of bring those benefits to buyers.
Interesting. And Silvia, I want to come to you next to hear it from the Italian point of view. By the way, I'm loving your background. But I'm trying to watch all the different TV screens behind you, not be doing. But how are you defining programmatic TV in Italy and at Pub Italia specifically? Because obviously Italy is a market where programmatic TV and connected TV isn't quite as advanced as other markets. So is it a term that you're referring to? How is it being brought up in conversation?
Okay, well, programmatic is a trading model where automation is leveraged to get and to gain efficiency to medium like TV, which is the most powerful medium. So programmatic TV is just automation applied to even TV inventory, being it OTT, native apps or HbbTV, or as Anta was saying, ad replacement on linear television. So it means applying efficiency to advertising, to TV advertising. And it's in Italy, we're starting talking about programmatic TV. It's an unavoidable trend, but not yet fully received.
Mm. And Austin, I'm interested in your perspective. Obviously, Zana is a global company, and your remit is EMEA. Do you think that we need to dissociate ourselves in the TV industry from the word programmatic as it pertains to traditional RTB and display? We've heard Andre, Silvia, and Lara all talk about automation. Is that what programmatic TV defines in the new TV landscape?
I think that the idea of the data-driven television, automation of television buying, and then that third component really can be more the real-time bidding. And that probably is the piece for things that are more akin to linear TV experiences is not really there yet. So it's just really nice to kind of see the momentum. But I think a lot of times, say the US to Europe kind of conversion stuff doesn't happen because of the definitions being so different. So programmatic TV in the US was actually a term that like TubeMogul would refer to, and it was just sort of IO based managed buys that weren't exactly, transacting on these three pillars we've talked about, and they deprecated that business. So when you kind of think about it over here, some of the underlying technology for television is different and would almost make it more like likely or attainable. So I think that that's kind of the momentum is there, but I think it does take time to kind of do that. So programmatic, with its successes in scale of display, I think people can really take the flexibility, the optimization, the efficiencies, but actually need to take a step back and view what is the broadcaster or the media owner's problem, challenges, what are buyers and sellers trying to do, and then how do you do that through these devices? There's devices, there's services, and then there's kind of the viewer that wants a good experience, that wants relevant ads. And so it's nice because there was always right time, right place, right ad, kind of a motto in programmatic. And I think that that's there, but there's kind of so much more possibility that's yet to be explored, like moment advertising. So something happens in a show and, say your sports team wins, and then, brought to you by your favorite beverage company. That's a much more impactful kind of experience for the brand as well as the viewer. But then technically pulling that off is still probably some kinks to work through.
Yeah, that's interesting. Lara, how close are ITV to being the moment broadcaster? It's a term that we used probably 5-6 years ago. There's a lot of kind of companies out there that were doing a lot of moment advertising. It feels like it's fallen by the wayside a bit. But is that something that this promise of programmatic TV, if you like, could bring to the table eventually for you guys?
It's certainly something we're working on, and not just us, but other broadcasters as well. I think one of the main barriers to truly realizing that from a codified or programmatic automated way, however you want to call it, is the availability of the metadata. So we've done some early prototypes using, open source APIs, video scanning APIs, etc., so that we can actually codify, scene, not scene by scene, but second by second, what you can see in a program, or indeed even an advertising campaign, tagging all of that up, making sense of the tags. All of that is quite a bit of work, even in the digital space. So then sort of applying that to linear as well, that's when you start to kind of think about how much data you need and the infrastructure that you need to be able to capture that in the first instance, and then making all of that data usable. So, that we've certainly seen some, we've certainly been prototyping and been seeing some initial success with that. But, we need to be able to, collect that level of metadata at scale, make it usable for that to really be, applied to programmatic. If I could also just pick up quickly on something Austin said, I think she's, you're absolutely right in terms of, the benefits of programmatic that we can lend into TV landscape. But I think it would be wrong of us not to acknowledge that, we've also seen lots of failures and lots of challenges in the programmatic landscape over the last 10 years. I mean, I've had firsthand knowledge from a media owner side of things. You can list them all off, like the over-reliance on cookies, data leakage issues, suboptimal supply chains, excessive daisy chaining, confusion over price models. So I think, when we look back and look at what we can bring forward into programmatic for TV, I think we also need to look at the failures, and we have an opportunity now that we're bringing programmatic into a very large medium, to do it properly, to do it right. And I think that's, that's sort of the approach that we're taking with Planet V. So it's not, kind of all singing, all dancing programmatic from, the kind of display definition, but it's about, taking as much of those learnings and making sure that we create a platform that is fit for purpose.
Yeah, I think we're all romantics in ad tech, aren't we? We remember the good times and completely brush aside the really bad times. Andre, that leads actually very nicely into what I want to ask you, which is about the data of programmatic TV and in this cookieless environment. Do you think that we have the opportunity to, because programmatic TV is a bit of a laggard compared to other digital channels, do we have the opportunity to remove the bad elements and improve them before we bring them to market? How can we play in that environment when it comes to data, identity, and this kind of cookieless world that we can operate in?
Yeah. First, I'll say yes, as I do believe that I think there's a lot less noise in, and I'll talk more specifically about connected TV, because that's where I think there's the most scale of the amount of advertisers and publishers and households that can be reached in the US anyway, in terms of data-driven targeting across the television. And there, we launched the first data marketplace in the US for connected TV back started beta testing in 2016. And one of the things that was an issue then was when you did have data, and we worked with just a handful of large data partners back then. Obviously we have much more now, but the big challenge was scale, right? So it wasn't, the quality of data, I believe, has been there from day one, in terms of not having to deal with the billions and billions of fake cookies that are bots, or a lot of the issues that have been there across traditional digital. But the big challenge was the scale wasn't there. So as soon as you started filtering an audience by household income and then geographical location, all of a sudden you couldn't fill any actual campaign. So the money wasn't there. I think what has really changed over the last 3 years, and even over the last 6 to 8 months with COVID and social distancing and staying home, is the just massive amount of scale that's available. So you do have the ability to go into a single media market and look at households with over only $100,000 of income that are in market for a pickup truck. And you can do that very regularly. And in fact, multiple advertisers, different competing advertisers, a Toyota and a Chevy and others, can all do that at the same time. And there's still enough inventory. I think where there's challenges to the second part of your question across identity is because the money is all the audience, and now thus the money is all shifting to connected TV. Everybody has an identity resolution, capability. Everybody has, claims to have a graph and a way to map data. And what the challenge is that we've seen that has caused issues for clients and partners is when they're leveraging solutions that were built for the cookie world and are really trying to just retrofit legacy solutions to an environment that's very different. You're talking about household level reconciliation targeting as opposed to individual. You may have multiple devices of different brands in the same household. So you could have a Apple TV in the living room and a Samsung in the bedroom. And so that's where I think the differentiation for TruOptik and what we're doing in terms of, we were always built to have the household graph and always built to be cookieless and are agnostic relative to the device or the publisher. And I think the big issue over the next 6 months to a year is going to be kind of the same weeding out that had to happen in terms of a decade ago when everybody claimed they did mobile, and they didn't, or 15 years ago when everybody had a cookie-based data marketplace, but only a few survived. I think that same kind of natural selection will happen, and some of the pretenders won't be around much longer.
Well, we shall see about that. It'll be the year of Programmatic TV for the next 10 years now. Guarantee you that for nothing. But Austin, are you thinking,
that's true.
Mia, what's the conversations you're having with clients and with broadcasters and with buyers alike about Programmatic TV in general and the identity within that and how identity plays out in that environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we see the trend, and maybe like Lara was saying, some of the learnings from programmatic is that the way to solve some of the challenges that came up was bringing the buyer and seller closer, or like allowing for people to, do programmatic guaranteed deals or kind of make their relationships more firm. So the kind of decentralization, I guess, of data sharing. So something like an InfoSum where the media owner can bring their data and the marketer can bring their data and safely share that. That's the most kind of straightforward, getting exactly what I'm intending to get way. For any other sort of extensions of that or probabilistic AI sort of ways to expand from that, those are kind of evolving, but I wouldn't say that there's sort of this infallible graph. We definitely explored a lot of different options, and we do see that one of pretty much bringing those two together is probably, publisher PII kind of data is the most accurate. So I think there's, in Europe had a different challenge with some GDPR. So it's definitely, like Andre's saying, like a different kind of scale problem too. There's 60 million kind of connected television homes, depending on how you're defining it. So the US, that's half of the US, and that's many countries involved.
Yeah, that's very true. Speaking of that, Silvia, I want to come to you next, because obviously in a market where connected TV is still very nascent, what are the barriers that you're finding? Kind of what needs to happen in Italy for you to see some kind of meaningful scale over the next few years?
Well, the Italian market is very peculiar because TV hasn't stopped being the favorite medium for viewers and advertisers. So moving from an over-the-counter selling method to programmatic is a kind of a cultural shift. And needs some time because television is still traded successfully in the traditional way. So it needs to will be bringing disruption in a successful trading model. We started 3 years ago selling addressable advertising on connected TV successfully, but basic conditions for programmatic TV would be to have more inventory addressable, to have targeted campaign, and this is subordinated to distribution of TV set, which is still very limited. We have almost 30% of Italian households who has connected television, and we expect with the switch off the DVB-T in 2022 to have a push in distribution, and of course with the 5G we'll have higher availability of data, so it will be easier to deliver advertising campaign in programmatic. And of course, publisher will have to make supply available in programmatic, and broadcaster will have to set rules and set standards to make programmatic successful, and not to have the same errors and mistakes that have been made in the digital space. So
very interesting. It's amazing we're running out of time, shocking, but I do want to touch upon the big thing that affects the TV industry, that any kind of digital emancipation of it is going to impact is regulation. So TV is one of the most regulated industries when it comes to any kind of consumer media, and obviously the regulation is very, very different from market to market. So Andre, for example, in the US, I mean, every time I go to the US, I'm just shocked by the pharmaceutical ads that you have on TV versus what we're allowed in the UK, which is almost nothing. But that's one kind of minor point, one minor thing I've noticed. But I'm interested into how regulation, what role regulation will play in the scalability and the future and evolution of CTV, according to each of you. So Andre, again, I go to the US, and I'll start with you, kind of what role regulation plays and how it will continue to play out.
I think it's going to play an important role. The big difference between the US and Europe is in the US now with CCPA, which is a California rule that pretty much everybody's just then put in place across the country in terms of on the tech and capability side. It's you have to give consumers the ability to opt out, as opposed to GDPR, where you have to opt in. So very, very different from that standpoint. I think we will continue to see more regulation come in terms of rights to be forgotten and information rights, and different states are doing different things. So we're waiting for some federal ruling on that. But we've been very proactive about the ability for people to have privacy control. Also uniquely looking at the household level. That's another thing that's different about television as opposed to a laptop or a mobile phone, where you're opting out at an individual level. You know, if I opt out the Roku in my bedroom, you know, what happens to the Xbox in the kids' room? Are those opt-out controls still honored? And so I think there's going to be more household privacy requirements when it comes to television, as opposed to individual. And that's kind of what we've planned towards, and we'll see if that happens.
Interesting. Austin, from your perspective, sitting across Europe and EMEA, how do you think regulation, how can programmatic play in this, in a very regulated ecosystem?
Well, one kind of thought that comes to mind is that, like, in the US, there are heavily regulated industries. So I saw on one side, you would see a finance or an insurance brand be really, really heavy in DR metrics when it came to their buying habits and how they approached campaign performance. And that was because, like, the rates are going to be set at a government level, and they can't, you know, use price points to compete. So those are some of the biggest companies that do branding and, like, the most engaging and exciting creative, you know, the Allstate duck and stuff. But the other thing about regulation is that regulation can be, you know, like health and safety and spur innovation. So, like, the auto industry, you know, wants better fuel efficiency in the cars. And I think there's a really, as far as what programmatic can do, it can probably optimize within a given set of parameters, and regulation would be those parameters. As far as how they actually end up getting set and translated into the digital world, I'm really curious to see how that plays out. And I think probably the media owners and TV can give more of a thought on the progression. You know, it took many years to probably build up what is now known as the TV regulatory bodies of every country. So I can't imagine it being a flip of a switch, but it would have big impacts on how people are able to optimize, you know, viewers' time, you know, because that's really what we're optimizing when we're delivering TV ads, and is the time with the user, the time with the viewer.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And Silvia, I'm interested to find out, kind of from Italy's perspective, how regulated is the Italian market for TV at the moment, and will programmatic coming into force make that cause increases in regulation, or will it be able to play quite nicely alongside what is currently a regulated market?
Well, traditional TV industry is highly regulated in Europe and in Italy too, and data as well. We cannot collect data freely. We are under GDPR, so there is no much availability of data as in the US. So this is a kind of a barrier, but I think we will need to keep the quality and the rules of TV and protect TV as a medium. And what we are doing in Mediaset and in Publitalia, we are trying to apply TV rules also to connected TV. So we are trying to keep and be in line with what already television impose as protection of minors or alcoholic in some programming. So we try to stick with the TV regulation. So I think this will be the line we need to keep. And of course, there will be the necessity to work together as a TV industry to fix rules and limits.
Yeah, absolutely. And Lara, finally to you, I'm interested in how you're seeing that play out at the moment at ITV and in the UK more generally. What role regulation plays in the advancement of programmatic TV and CTV?
Sure. I think the point Silvia just made on collaboration is a huge one. I think in the UK and probably in other markets across Europe, broadcasters and TV have a very good track record actually of collaborating. We think about Barb and Thinkbox and other initiatives. And all of those different, organizations are on point in terms of trying to figure out how, we move from, a broadcast first type of medium to an IP first medium, which is definitely coming. I think the other point about, regulation into programmatic, actually just the process of digitizing or codifying those rules and regulations and requirements is a very useful one. Just to kind of put those almost, things that people have, TV industry has known all their lives, someone who's been working in TV all their lives, but actually putting it down in code is a very interesting process because it's very illuminating in terms of where, how things actually fit together. So that's a really good process. And I think, ultimately is a very, will bring benefit to the industry overall, because if it's done correctly, then all of a sudden, we have mechanism to add efficiency to the process. Digitization will allow us to do that. It can help significantly with quality control. And then also, I think most importantly, and someone else also mentioned this, having it codified and in a programmatic way allows us to apply experimentation much more, in a much more agile way and at scale, so that we can actually make continuous improvement. So I think from that point of view, it's worth the effort kind of trying to, translate those rules and regulations into programmatic settings.
Absolutely. As Austin said, regulation forces you to innovate. And actually, we could find that from regulation, particularly so much regulation cross-market, it could bring about some wonderful innovation as programmatic TV, as CTV continues to scale. So it's going to be a really interesting space to watch. I'm afraid we've run out of time, but it's been so good chatting to you. I think it could have been one that could have lasted much longer than it has done. So thank you so much, Silvia, Andre, Lara, and Austin. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Shingy, welcome to New Video Frontiers.
Do you want to do that again? I can hear you rustling. I can hear you. I don't know whether you're rustling with paper or you got some goddamn. You're a total rustle right now.
He's always practicing. I like you. Staring at me and I'm so.
All right, hang on.
So, Shingy, welcome to New Video Frontiers.
Hi, Vincent. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm it's quite interesting and a bit weird doing these digital events, but it's the future, I'm told. And yeah, our event has always been, as the name suggests, the event has always been about the future. So we'll give it a go. We'll give it a go. So I think one person who emailed me over the last couple of weeks coming up to the event, they were kind of curious. They said, "Oh, I'm really looking forward to finding out what Shingy's been doing since leaving AOL." So fill us in. What have you been up to?
Well, it's not AOL. It was AOL and Verizon and Yahoo, all that combined as Verizon Media Group. So yes, I'm definitely known as the person who left AOL. So correct myself in that correction. What have I been up to? Trying to figure out how to answer that question really well. No, but truthfully, here's a couple of things. I took some time just to pause. Vincent, I'd been on the road 300 days of the year. I have a young daughter. I was the guy who would try and promise to come home every weekend and see my family. And yeah, as that person who is a constant output machine, I needed to replenish and learn. So I did some really sort of intimate events where primarily the audience were minorities and in the marketing space trying to, expand their career in marketing. And I'd come off from doing a bit and I'd sit and I'd listen and I'd stay there for a couple of days and really absorb the content, which for me was incredibly refreshing. So I've become a student, but I've also spent some time understanding, how I could treat this go around as a portfolio, which is why I left. And, wanted to understand what that really looked like. What is the gig economy going to feel like? How is it going to be if everyone's going to think about, I don't like the word side hustle, but people talk about that. So I never really got to focus on one of those. So if I treat it like a portfolio, what does that really mean? So the only way I could talk about it was to live it. And at the same time, make sure that the core of the ethics that I believe in, the ethos of my own human truth was part of it. So I've been really selective about what I've been doing and who I've been talking to and how I've been doing it, because I also want to make sure I see the sunset or the sunrise at an ocean somewhere. So that's the most important thing for me. But it's been refreshing and it's been unique. And then of course when March rolled around, it accelerated everything for me. It also sort of helped understand that making a decision to not be someone who traveled so frequently, it completely crystallized my frequency there, and I feel really good about those decisions that I made.
Yeah, I think that learning time, I think that's something I've experienced personally with all of this, has sort of pushed us to develop a research business. And as you know, we've been presenting some of the research at the event, but just having that time to just doing 60 interviews across different European markets and just spending time chatting to people about what they're experiencing. That learning probably wouldn't have been something I would have been able to have time to do personally had it not been for all of this. And I think it was a wake-up call for myself, that it's very easy to stay in your old modes of working and to not sort of refresh your mind and your thinking and to sort of take a step back from it all. So I think that's been...
But Vincent, can I just add something else to it? So prior to March, I had a few months where I really did start thinking about the portfolio differently. What brands do I care to engage with and try and help them, with cultural shifts? Also understand, what do I do about continuing being an educator? Could there be something I do more formally there? Looking at online education, etc. So lots of things that just felt like, yeah, this is kind of where I'm thinking the dimension goes. And then as March happened, I did what everyone else does. You go through these moments, and I equate it to driving a car. So we're driving a car, everything will seem to be okay, but then suddenly the car stopped or the lights dimmed. I go, cook, the engine wouldn't start or the on switch wouldn't do its thing. And when it did start up, there are 3 phases I believe you go through. You spend some time looking in the rearview mirror going, okay, what's back there? What caused this to happen? Why did the car suddenly stop in this zone? You spend all this time, it was really good back there. Why do we just drive through that? And then you spend some time at the dashboard where you're like, hey man, what is happening here? I just want to make sure that my battery is good. What happened to the radio station? Why can't I get back to what I was listening to previously? Have I got enough fuel in the tank? What's going, is the dashboard okay? And once you get through that fogginess, you start to look at the, beyond the bonnet, and you let your peripheral vision get further away. And then now looking at the horizon, you're going, I'm not quite sure where we're navigating to, but I'm going to trust my peripheral is going to get me there. And I'm going to be smart enough that I'm not going to run into a deer if it jumps out in front of me. And you go through these phases, and it takes time. And that's what happens with the human condition, man. When you go through this, and it's shared, you're sharing it as I'm sharing with it, and we're the other side of the world together. But it's not just, it's an American thing. It's a European thing. It happened to everybody at the same time. And I think what that's done is it not only has it accelerated time and future, it's also accelerated your own sense of it. So you come out of that dizziness and think, okay, what am I going to do? And how am I as a person engaging now with brands differently? Or am I? And I think it's a totally different mix of that analogy I just described to you, coming in and out of your life at different times, depending on how you're affected by the signals that are sent to you, whether that's media, friends, social, whatever it is you're getting your signals from. And you're going to go through the constantness, where I felt like previously we were all going down the same highway and the same path, almost feeling like we're driving the same goddamn car. So it feels really refreshing to sort of feel like, oh, we can meet people where they need to be met now, which is different. So I'm sorry I didn't answer. That's a little bit of a longer version of the question. But that's more like a segue into what the heck is going on. Because, you know, since March to now, you know, I felt like I was on a trajectory and I'm just a different person and things are different. And I find the observation to be fascinating.
Yeah. No, I think what the hell is going on is the overarching theme of this year's conference. I think everyone's trying to...
You're welcome.
Yeah. Yeah, we can use it on our literature. So how are brands adapting? I mean, again, you know, another theme is this rapid digital acceleration that you alluded to. How are brands adapting to this, the brands that you're speaking to?
Okay, so look, I think there's a really interesting way to see this. Again, that analogy, as I said, that, you know, look backwards, sit in the moment, look forward. A lot of brands, certainly in the quiet times, were probably not able to really accelerate their advertising or the way they engage with people how they would like to, because truthfully, there's a demand issue, or sorry, a supply issue. There wasn't a demand issue, it was a supply issue. Mm. And with that comes the manufacturing of it. So why drive demand for a product when you can't supply it? And then on top of that, you've got the whole, well, you know, what's going to happen when I do supply it? Are people going to want to interact with it, et cetera, particularly for consumables? So, you know, I think that there's an ethos of how do you adapt and change? And of course, we see, I think the thread that I hear constantly over the last 6 months, the number one word I will use is empathy. The challenge with empathy is how do you do it authentically and not come off as a scene cheesy or Me Too. And I mean Me Too in the good way, not in the 2019 way. But what I do think about that is, so what do I mean by that? Really, it's about, and by the way, Me Too is different. When it's Me Too, it's like, I'm empathizing with you. You know, I feel like that too, you know, as opposed to, you know, the alternate. But what I do think is interesting is that if brands, and they did, I think very smart brands really did try and say, hey, we're here to support. And there's that video where somebody edited where they found every single video in the early moments of March and April where people felt like they had to advertise. And they really did, you know, just bring it all together, and it had this lineage and it had this frequency and consistency that felt like there was one agency popping out everybody's PSA ad. But what happened around that, I think, is the ability for brands to just stop yelling, and they just paused. And they've taken this moment to pause and listen and watch and see how people engage with their brand. So when we talk about humanizing brands for the last 10 years, the truth of it has happened quickly. Because if you're not telling somebody, this is how I want you to feel about my brand, and you allow somebody to express it, things can happen. I mean, in the UK, I thought was really interesting as Cadbury came out with a, is it called Twirl? I think it's Twirl. It's a chocolate bar, but it used to be a limited edition chocolate bar, an orange version of this product. And they had they're watching the conversation and realized that people were really looking for nostalgia, and they wanted this bar to come back. So it was the first chocolate bar, I think, to have a pre-sale, which I thought was pretty amazing, man. So they're able to, in a time where it felt like, wow, what are people really leaning into? You know, apart from empathy, it's nostalgia. So why not resurrect a product that people feel comfort with? It's not in our mainstream manufacturing. We can't manufacture it quickly, but we're going to manufacture it now and put it in pre-sale. And I've heard that with other companies as well. So, you know, let's say that you're a spirits brand and people find that, you know, lubricant drinking is happening. However, because you're not going to a fancy restaurant and spending all that money in a restaurant now, you actually may invest a lot more in a spirit that you normally wouldn't have bought. So you're still spending, but you're spending it differently. So there's an opportunity for brands to sort of understand that, okay, this is what's going to happen for quite some time. Maybe we can change our product line up to suit people's change. I look at somebody like Unilever, man. They did a beautiful thing where they decided to try and do ice cream on demand, because in the middle of summer, you know, there could be more demand for nostalgia, and ice cream is at the top of that list. Yeah. And they teamed up with a company that did the drone delivery. And the idea is that you could, you know, 3 punnets of ice cream could be almost magically delivered to you. So I think those sort of cultural moments around product is really kind of a smart thing.
Yeah. This school of thought, I mean, as we're talking about this digital acceleration, people like Ad Contrarian, who we've had over to speak at our events in London before, he would sort of argue the case that, great brands cannot be built online, or, aren't built, or, is that your view? Would you share that view?
No. If I can take a contentious position, I could join in and say, yeah, for sure. But let me take a different point, and we can come back and decide whether or not we agree. But if you look at a lot of the D2C, so the direct consumer acceleration, that is all done through social contagion. It's building a brand using the sight, sound, and emotion of what digital can do. With that came this influx of incredible brands that you've never ever experienced before, but you buy into them because they're really building all their principles of awareness and intent and desire and action. So the whole AIDA principles have already circulated beautifully into it. The brand iconography, all of the sentient that you would expect from something that physically has been in the world for potentially hundreds of years, can all be essence online. The challenge with that is longevity.
Yeah.
And firstly, your model has to twist and turn to make sure that when the product comes in the door and you unpack it, that it feels like something you've just bought in on. And if it wasn't glistening, gorgeous, whatever, sustainable, ecological, it wasn't ethical, emotional, if it wasn't any of those things, look out, because that's going to come back and bite you in the bum. So I would say that yes, to a certain degree, but no. I think you can actually you can build massive contagion for something that is online. The challenge is, certainly since March and the acceleration digitally, is that I think there is more demand now for offline brands to go the other way, to go digital. So in real life, remember that was a term of 2019, IRL. I mean, really, in real life was something that we felt like, okay, you can build these brands online, now get them offline. Or, it's all about these experiences because we're spending all this time in this ethereal or the ephemeral. How do we come off it and feel like we're really getting our hands dirty on product or experience? So brand experience was one of those big buzzwords, right? The challenge is, how do you take that real world product and take it online? So I think the physical to digital connection there's an enormous amount of energy that can happen around that. A couple of things that can do that. The rebirth of QR. So QR is everywhere. I mean, if you've been in Asia for the last 10 years, it's just the common denominator to interaction. Places like WhatsApp have done a great job of it. WeChat have done an incredible job of it. So interacting just in physical world and digitally with QR has been incredible, but there hasn't really been a defining moment around design, advanced QR. So that's happening, I believe. Close proximity Bluetooth will help when you're able to be somewhere around 8 feet, 6 feet. So technologies that really do help you understand, how do I bridge the gap between physically touching the widgets and maybe interacting with it, but not being that close proximity, which I think is something that people are still concerned about.
Going to stay on the sort of creative theme. I mean, the digital advertising, it seems to be maturing. I think it's fair to say. I mean, I'm sure we've got plenty of greenfield space in the future, but it is maturing to a degree. But I put this out on Twitter recently, actually, just how I'm seeing less and less advertising that wows me in the way that a page takeover used to. That big splash where your screen jumps out at you and this brand smashing it. And I'm not saying we don't have good creative. I'm saying that the technology doesn't seem to be leveraged in imaginative ways anymore. I think there's a long list of reasons that people offer, from everything from, programmatic right through to it just isn't very sort of cost effective to do those integrations anymore. But do you feel like the industry digital has lost a little bit of its magic that it had in the early days, maybe a little bit lacking in imagination compared to years past?
Depends. It depends around what you determine as advertising. So if you just said buttons and banners across the internet that you can buy today that are IAB approved, et cetera, I would say, yeah. And here's why we've really not capitalized upon that opportunity, Vincent. Every single brand on planet Earth I speak to have a T-bar strategy. They want to touch every single person on planet Earth horizontally. Awesome. Programmatic will do a ripper job of doing that for you. At the same time, they'll have a deep, intimate relationship. Really? Okay, so that intimacy is the hardest challenge. And do you think a 728 by 90 and 300 by 250 is going to give you that intimacy? No. And when that was invented back in the day, it wasn't really designed for brand marketing as we try and force it into today. It was designed around direct response. And what we have done as an industry is not evolved those beautiful formats that have been cut across every single website on planet Earth. The challenge is we now have blindness, and we've developed that blindness for the last 20 years. So the only thing that has adapted and changed is the ability to target your audience more infinitely. Awesome. So if that's the case, the next pivot around that is then frequency. How often are you going to target that audience? What we haven't focused enough on is what you're going to put in front of them. And here's the challenge. You know, for the last couple of years, people still treat creative as a non-working part of a media strategy. Are you out of your mind? At the end of the day, with crappy creative, you're never going to get a great media strategy to execute anyway. So I think there needs to be confidence, just generally in the industry, to say, yeah, we sucked at format, but we equally have sucked at creative. And so it's our job to have creative separate and actually create something that feels like it's engaging again. So here's what I believe. You have direct response advertising, and that's the programmatic and all that great stuff. And it is great because it's really allowed people to advertise to a vast audience. However, you've got this beautiful ebb and flow of emotional advertising, which is all about brand building. So you've got sales overnight, direct response, you've got brand building, all this emotional bits and bobs. At the end of the day, those two creatives, in my humble opinion, should never meet. The challenges in the last, 5 years or so, since certainly acceleration of programmatic, people have been treating performance-based marketing and emotional-based marketing the same, and they're trying to force it into the same performance indicators. And I think that's completely inappropriate. So I would argue that, yes, there is a massive opportunity for change, but we also have to change the way that we manifest that, because the way that we're thinking about it from the old way of agency, media, and creative is wrong. I would also argue that advertising has been redefined. So, when we were at AOL and, I helped out with media, as you know, we were definitely trying to say we have programmatic and one of the largest around, awesome. But at the same time, we're also trying to come up with incredible advertising. And we took a nod from the old media magazines. When you flip open a Vogue, you get 20 pages of ads, which are all glorious, that feel like editorial. And then you get to the editorial, which sometimes feels a bit donk in comparison to the ads that we just flipped through. But if you can bring those two together, that's really what we try to do with Devil. Devil now is something that's probably 10 years old. But the idea of it was incredible, right? And so was iAds when it came out with Apple. But the problem was the cost, implementation, and the availability, meaning the audience wasn't big enough for marketers who want to touch everybody. Now, I would argue that micro or slow journalism was going to take a comeback. I said that 10 years ago. And what did I mean by that? It means that instead of keeping these homogenized environments, we felt like anything that is new is news, people are going to spend more time in things they really care about. I think Reddit have got that right. So you've got communities in places like Reddit. And, I think there's also an interesting time because it's pretty contentious. So politically, it's a great place to hang out. But, this could actually be really good native advertising in those communities. I mean, the most obvious piece of native advertising across all those social communities, people who do, great dance videos on TikTok, that's a branded video in many respects. Today, you just may not know it. In some of these more matured platforms, which TikTok pretty much is, you have to label this stuff better so people understand it. But when it's really authentic, what is an ad feels like content. And what is content could feel like an ad. And this is not new. This has been going on forever, man. Music videos have lent into this. You're suddenly driving down the road in a Corvette and, you have the great spirit bottle that turns up. It's pretty bloody obvious at times. But there is authenticity to it. It feels like, that feels like it's all organic. But when it feels like you're reading a page and a big dirty ad comes up against it, doesn't feel like it actually has anything that feels like it's part of the organicness. I think people see through it. That's why ad blockers have been a thing for the last 5 years, dude.
Yeah.
We just have to think about them differently. So all these channels matter, to paraphrase. It's all about context. How are you actually turning up as a brand in the context that people want to feel it in? And if you do advertising in the context, it feels like advertising, it's going to be perceived as advertising, which will have a low interaction rate.
So if I was to give you
in my humble opinion. All right, carry on. What's your next question?
So if I was to give you a magic wand, and you could rock a magic wand quite well with that hair. You've got a wizard vibe going on. It would suit you. But if you could solve,
Vincent, piss off.
If you could solve one problem in digital advertising today, aside from IAB units, what would you solve and why?
Wow, I think I summarized it in that rant that I just gave you, which was the ability to understand the client's performance indicators, their pressure as a brand versus the way that potentially an agency and creative interact today doesn't necessarily feel like it's in tune with the platforms that are accelerating.
Yeah.
And there's always a catch up. So that's one thing I would like to do, which is, have brands lead engagement in a way that felt like, oh, we created that, as opposed to the platform creating it for them. So that's one thing. The other thing that I think needs to be fixed is just appreciation for what I think is different. So you've got direct response versus brand creative, and they do different things. And we need to understand that that's what they do. They're there to do different things. And one is about spend. You want to get more people to your front door. Awesome. Spend more money. It's going to get you there, and they're going to respond better. But if you're also trying to allow Vincent to close his eyes to remember what that brand was that he bought that was in a sustainable, eco-friendly clothing line that he can't remember right now, then you have to do more about tugging to the heartstrings, I think, not just, because those things that you just told me you had a sustainable product, that's not a direct response. That's probably more of an emotional decision. So fixing emotional, which today brands are calling empathy in my mind, and also fixing the pipes to make sure that we're getting to the audiences that will care. Because I'll tell you two things for sure. We cannot stuff the genie back in the bottle. I would argue that even as we move and shift into this new world, the dynamic of spending time digitally is probably not going to shift to a factor of 100 or 50. But I was reading that, some people, social consumption, certainly during March to now-ish, has gone up 50%. That's a lot, man. Yeah. And for some people, just being online has gone up 30+%. 33, I think, was the average. Now, here's what I think is remarkable about that. As this blurring of work and home has happened, so is the balance blurred. But there's an opportunity there. So if I'm in a workday mode and somebody decides to tap into my, emotion about what I want to do outside of the work environment, there's an opportunity to do it in a time that is a day part that's very different to anything we've seen in the past. So if we're in this for a while, man, I think people could totally re-engineer the way that we market to people if we get ahead of it, because it's not about day parting anymore. It's not about just audiences that are based on demographic. I think it's far more about psychographic. I think it's far more about emotional domain. It's also far more about accomplishment and different types of emotions that I could be tapped with. And if you could message that, I think that's really important.
So looking into your own future, what have you got planned for next year? What's the future hold for Shingy?
More of the portfolio, man. I want to still work with brands that I think are really doing incredible work, culturally, particularly now it's accelerated. So I'm excited about that, Vincent. And, who knows, maybe next year I'll get on a plane. But until then, brother, I'm just trying to figure out how these behaviors change. So, if you think about it, what do these communities look like? I've replaced FaceTime for FenceTime, where I'm trying to at least have socially distant conversations with people. How are we socially, in this world of being socially connected, how are we using it to satisfy all of those things that we talk about? That's another piece that I'm thinking about. Will creativity really be unleashed next year? Because I think this year it's been hibernation mode, and there are some elements of creative being unleashed, but it's not through advertising, it's through actual new products or listening, building new franchises. I mean, I think if I look at what Diageo's did, the beer version, is it Guinness maybe? They did these pop-ups where people were so devastated they couldn't get out to a pub that they brought a little tiny pub as a little garden shed to people's front lawns and created these little acts of joy, So I'm sort of intrigued by that. How to embrace the slowdown and sort of figure out what that might mean in terms of how people are going to interact, particularly as this virtual connection sustains. What does slowdown mean truly? And how do you actually use that as a good moment, not just as a lane to stay in? And also with everything that's been going on politically, socially, culturally, how are we defining the line between ethics? They're messy as. I'll just give you an example. You know, you think about this pre-COVID, the conversation we were talking about and celebrating was things like climate change and sustainability and how to make the world a better place. And then now in COVID, it's like if something's not wrapped 6 times in plastic and comes in baby kid gloves and, you know, sits and rests in a quiet corner so I can spray it all down. I mean, there are certain things that we felt ethical about that just, it tugs at me, man. You know, it's very challenging. And to get back to a place that we feel like all the things that we were believing in, how do we do that in a new paradigm? And that's just going to be something to observe. So I'm pretty excited about that. Sorry, that's a mouthful, isn't it? I've got a lot.
Yeah, it was better than saying, you know, more of the same.
No, not more of the same.
Yeah, but thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Vincent, it's always a pleasure, my brother. Take care.